garden, and like a high ornamental garden. And then Rekha, her specialism before us was kitchen gardening, so fruit and vegetables. So some people might have seen her column in Gardener's World magazine. I'm not plugging it, but it's worth reading it if you do buy the subscription. And she decided to move into ornamental horticulture as well. So she's quite into propagation, but then actually we all are in a way. So then we divide up things as well.
Clearly, it's then sort of in the main a team effort. There's obviously, I mean, I'm lucky being a resident of the inn, and I've had the opportunity to spend time in the garden really over the last 5 years. Since you came on board, Sean, there have been some major changes to parts of the garden, and I'm going to come to one of those specifically in a moment. But talk to me about the planning process. Is it just the case that you get out of bed of a morning and think, oh, I'm going to plant over there? Or is there a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, a 5-year plan? How does it all work looking to the future?
So we come under the same planning routine as all the departments at the inn. So we, at the moment, actually, I'm working on the draft 5-year plan. So every year we do a 5-year plan where we set out our objectives for the garden, our aspirations, also any kind of for projects or any kind of key risks to the garden and the running of the garden. And then we lay out a budget associated with that looks 5 years ahead. It's also a really good opportunity to do an assessment of where you are that year in terms of your spending. So we use it as a way of checking that we're on track with what we predicted for that year, and if we're going to underspend in any areas or overspend. And then in the autumn time, we do an annual budget. So we then put down the actual core kind of final figures for projects or for ongoing costs as well. So I spend a lot of time, quite a large part of time of gardening is actually evaluating in terms of how people enjoy the garden, but also the kind of visual displays and what it is and how we can improve. And so that kind of feeds into those 5-year plans.
Well, certainly it's important. I mean, I know from my executive producer, Henrietta Amodio, for these series of Master H Meets, that my budget is apparently £4.30. And if I were to spend more than that, I mean, heaven only knows what trouble I would get into with the finance committee. So no doubt you keep a sort of firm grip on the purse strings as your role as head gardener.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So the finance committee needs to be happy with how we're spending the inn's money. So yeah, that is something.
Yes, keep it in mind. Talking of projects, what is the next major project for the garden? If you're allowed to say, if it's confidential and behind the scenes, don't feel the need to answer it. But I'd be intrigued to know what's coming next.
So it's not confidential or behind the scenes. It's part of Project Pegasus. So the next big project for the garden is outside the garden gates, and with the scaffolding all starting to come down and the building, the roof, we can see the roof now, and the hall looks amazing, and with Treasury being revealed again, then we'll be looking at the external areas around Hall and the Treasury building and how we soften and plant up those areas. So this summertime we'll be planting things like bleached lime trees, and we'll be moving some large lead planters, and we'll be making the area feel more like how the main garden feels. So we'll be doing some really amazing kind of spring displays, bulb displays and planters, and then they'll go into our exciting summer displays with potentially like grasses and salvias or maybe succulents some years. And then the core of the planting will be quite Mediterranean in the ground, so lots of lavenders, rosemary and things that are kind of scented. So it's south facing, so that should be really nice when people are sat outside. Pegasus Bar, again, in the future, it'll feel like people can probably go on holiday then anyway, but it'll feel like you're on holiday even if you're not.
Just out of curiosity, a sort of follow-up on that, I, as you may know, I do a bit of education law work, and I once was advising a school, and it was a relatively new build school, where they actually seemed to have a lawn on the roof. You know, I was expecting modern technology, solar panels, that sort of thing, but they actually had a garden with a lawn and everything on the roof. Are the powers that be letting you loose on the new roof of Project Pegasus, or is that a no-go area?
I mean, maybe we should be thinking about that within the 5-year planning process. I mean, I think maybe a hot tub and
Sean, I should say that I'm looking on Gallery View, and Master Treasurer has just buried his head in his hands at the thought of letting
the roof looks very nice as it is, so I don't think we'll be making a green roof up for that. But you never know. I think it's unlikely. I think as part of the planning process, I won't be allowed to kind of have a free reign on the roof of Hall. But
well, as far as I'm concerned, you know, were it down to me, you can put a lawn on the roof. We won't say anything. We'll just surprise everyone one morning and we'll put some turf down on that. Back to the major projects, because one recent major project, which I very much enjoyed, is the transformation of the fountain in the garden. I remember last year during lockdown, on many occasions, sitting at the old fountain, relaxing, enjoying the solitude of the garden. But obviously that's undergone a serious transformation. Number one, it's enlarged in size, and we have this new border around the fountain. Firstly, what was the thinking behind the project? And secondly, I noticed even yesterday when I was in the garden that many of the plants are still very much in their infancy. What is it going to look like when everything is in bloom?
So yeah, we're really excited with how the pond garden and the fountain has been transformed, and watching people enjoy it now. So the thought process was, as part of taking over the role, as I kind of mentioned, a lot of the work was evaluating the garden, so the strengths of the garden, but also opportunities to improve the garden and also how people enjoy the garden. And out of that, that's with the team and also the masters of the garden and chatting to residents and different people. And out of that process, well, one of the things was the pond before had a leak anyway, so we knew we had to do work on the pond. So you might remember that the level was never quite right. It was always slightly down and we're always topping it up. So we knew we had to do some work on the pond, and it felt like an opportunity to do a larger project and improve the area.
Do you know, actually, I never noticed that, because usually I was in a position where I consumed so much wine that I couldn't have told you whether it was level or indeed the fountain actually had water in it.
I mean, maybe it was flowing with not water, but
I see.
So one of the things also was that it felt that the scale of the pond wasn't in proportion with the rest of the garden, and the materials they didn't unify with the other materials in the garden. So it used to be a brick surround, which was added in the late 1970s, and the boy statue used to actually be attached to the pond, if you remember. And then there was paving slabs around the edge of that, and we used to do some really nice pot displays to try and soften it in the summer. But in the winter, it was particularly kind of stark. So we started by thinking about how the area would be used, and people like yourself, so people are drawn to the water, and we wanted to create kind of intimate seating areas for groups or people on their own to sit and enjoy the water, and then frame views, kind of key views out from that area. So if you're sat in the larger seating area where there's a bench and 2 armchairs, you're looking west, so you get a sunset and you can see Big Ben, you can see the London Eye in the distance. But also, obviously, you've got the fountain in the foreground, which is really nice. And then if you decide to sit on your own on the singular chair, you're looking back towards the courts and across the garden and in the main gates. And so we wanted it to feel like a garden room. So when you're sat in it, you feel enclosed, but actually you're not, because of people can see in. And when you're stood up, you can still see the wider views of the garden. So that was how it developed. And then we spent quite a long time really kind of marking out areas and kind of getting a feel of what we wanted. And then in terms of the planting now, so we'll let the yew hedges all knit together and create like a low cloud shapes. And then
because at the moment they very much appear as sort of small individual, if I can call them trees, that's probably the wrong terminology to use, but they will eventually knit together.
Sure. So yeah, so like there's two big yew mounds either side of the peony garden. We won't let them get as big as that, but they would have been planted as small little shrubs or trees, like you said, and then you allow them to grow together and then you clip them into the shapes that you want. So we'll allow that to happen. We wanted the water to really be the focal point of the garden. So we are growing in the water some water lilies and also lotus flowers. So that's quite unusual and should be very special if we succeed. And they need a long growing season and the warmth which the city will hopefully provide. Though this spring, you wouldn't think so necessarily, but we'll be quite special if we manage to grow the water lotus. And then around the outside, I would call it maybe unusual, more like an Asian woodland feel. So it's lots of kind of textures and greens. There is flowers though, and we've worked with a specialist nursery in North Wales called Krug Farm. And they're known, when it's not COVID times, we're going plant collecting to Vietnam and South America and bringing back some really choice and unusual special things. So they're kind of intermingled. So there's things like Cardiandra, which is a herbaceous hydrangea, which should be really pretty. And there's things like Osmundo azatica, which is like an Asian fern, which will grow up to about 90 centimeters a meter. So the nice thing is watching it evolve and all the planting is settling in, which we're really excited about. So the yew's pushing on new growth already, and it will all knit together, I think, by the end of the summer. Not the yew will take a couple of years, but the herbaceous stuff will knit together by the end of summer.
I mean, I suppose you were one of those people who was celebrating on Saturday when we had a day of rain and the entire garden. I was there during the week, and I was there again yesterday. And the transformation after a day of rain at this time of the year is quite extraordinary.
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's been so dry though, so it feels like a completely different garden, and it feels very lush. And yeah, it was amazing. But I would say, for those who were nearby or on site, that we're coming up to one of our peak moments in the garden. So we're just on the cusp of when all the kind of foxgloves and sweet rocket and different things will all explode. And it's a really special time. The wisteria is almost out now. The peonies are all out. So the garden, if we do say so ourselves, is looking pretty wonderful. So I think people...
I would agree with that. It is looking wonderful at the moment. One area of the garden that we haven't touched on, and I guess it's a garden in its own right, is the garden in front of the Master's house, Robin Griffith-Jones. And for those members of the inn or those watching, if you go to Robin's Gate, there are a number of plaques, dealing with the status of the garden. Is that something, Sean, that you and your team with, or is that dealt with separately as, if you like, Church of England property by their gardeners?
Well, they do have their own gardener. So a gardener called Bob, he comes and he maintains their garden. But you're right, it is a really beautiful private. Their wisteria is out at the moment. It looks wonderful. What we usually do is for Open Garden Squares weekend, we usually open our garden and the Master's garden, and Kate at Middle Temple will open up, and then people can come and enjoy all three gardens at the same time. But unfortunately, that's been made virtual this year because of coronavirus. So hopefully next year we'll be doing the same again, where all three gardens will open at the same time.
Yeah. Now, here's, Sean, a moment where my technological skills may fail. But what I'm hoping to do to everyone is share my screen. And if I just press various buttons, there it is. And if I do that, hopefully everybody can see this. Now, folks, this photograph was taken by me last August. And it's something that Sean has introduced, this little table outside the potting shed. And you can see on the photograph, there are various little jars of wonderful things. Is this just for display purposes, Sean, or is this something that, the seedlings then transfer to the garden? Is it PR? Is it advertising? What purpose does this wonderful little table serve?
Well, I'm glad you enjoy it, and lots of people seem to. So it's part of our interpretation of the garden. So it's how we can share the garden with visitors and residents. So the main purpose is, if people are interested, which actually a lot of our visitors and residents are, in what we are growing, then we select things of interest at that time and put them in a specimen jar and then put their Latin name with it so that people can look it up or just learn what the plants are. And then we usually pick one particular plant which we feature as the plant of interest at that moment, and we give a little bit more details, potentially where it's from in the wild, and its growing conditions, or what's particularly special about how it grows at the inner temple. And hopefully it's just a nice way for us to engage with people in the garden, and they seem to really enjoy it.
I certainly do. I mean, every time I go in, I always, well, as you've seen, I tend to sit at the fountain, but I will always walk towards the potting shed to see what is on display on that table. And it's marvelous to learn so many wonderful things about the plants. A different area of the garden now, if I may, and I've noticed yesterday that this has happened around some of the trees and also on the sloping area at Crown Office Row, what you call your meadow area. What is the purpose of the meadow area in terms of the garden as a whole?
So it brings quite a few different things. So it's really good for biodiversity and supporting bees and invertebrates. So we do have a relationship with beekeepers in the city. So there's beehives on roofs on Fleet Street, and like during lockdown, they said that their beehives were really did really well during lockdown, where lots of beehives in the city didn't, because of lots of the gardens weren't maintained in the same way that ours was. So that was really nice. There's also a historical link. So one of the in the 1890s, the garden committee asked a famous gardener at the time, William Robinson. He's still like one of the most influential gardeners of all time, for advice about how to take the garden forward. And he wrote a book called The Wild Garden, and he was revolutionary in turning away from the Victorian tradition at the time of kind of bedding plants, which are generally sterile and kind of regimented, and encouraging gardeners to take on a more natural approach and encourage wild flowers and more kind of successional planting. So it's part of that. So hopefully you notice in the spring we've planted thousands and thousands of spring bulbs in there. So we've now got snowdrops coming up with winter aconites, then followed by species tulips and some kind of dwarf narcissi, daffodils and different things. So also it's also really beautiful, I think, to have these areas where we've got wildflowers and more specialist bulbs coming through. So hopefully that answers the question.
Forgive my ignorance, but for example, the meadow areas around two of the large trees, you know, between the potting shed and the fountain, does the actual creation of the meadow area enhance the growth of the trees, or is it just, does it not make any difference?
No, it does. So it stops people being on the root plate of the tree, so it discourages compaction. So it's really good practice for the management of old trees, and they're on those significant, they date to the 1770s, those three plane trees.
Wow.
So there are real, you know, we need to do everything we can to make those trees as happy as they possibly can be and to survive as long as they will. So one of those things is that we grow the wildflowers underneath them to stop people from being on top of the root plate.
Yeah. Sean, time is against us, but can I turn my penultimate question, if I may?
Sure.
And if you don't feel inclined to answer this, I will totally respect that. But I heard on the grapevine not some years ago, but some months ago, that one morning,
oh, I think you've frozen. You frozen for everyone?
There we are. No, he's back.
Yeah.
No, you see, it just goes to show. I get this every time. It's BT, and if anyone out there has BT broadband, change to something else, because BT is wholly unreliable. Cut off in my moment of prime with the wonderful Sean. Anyway, Sean, what I was going to ask you was this: I heard on the grapevine that one morning when you and Sophie
bottles.
shall we say, empty vodka bottles in the garden. You know, sort of obviously someone had been having a little rave, a little party. Did we ever find out who was responsible for this vodka-fueled rave?
I didn't anyway. I imagine the porters seem to know most things, so I'm sure they know. But yeah, we did. I mean, usually it's more likely to be champagne corks, so that we might need to clear up. But yeah, we did find an empty vodka bottle. I think there was maybe some evidence of crisps and things, so there was food at the event as well.
All right, so it wasn't just someone had come into your beloved garden and thought, I'm going to have a vodka party. It wasn't like that.
Well, it could have been. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure necessarily. I mean, yeah, I don't know in terms of if they drank the whole bottle in one session or how many people. But I mean, it's a nice. I mean, vodka or no vodka. I mean, we actually we enjoy people enjoying and socialising in the garden. Just if they clear up after themselves, then we're happy, and they respect the surroundings and the other users. Then everyone's happy.
And just on that, maybe for the benefit of some residents who are watching, are there any restrictions that you sometimes put in place? I know that the porters very often will close if there are high winds for health and safety reasons, but are there any other restrictions? I mean, for example, could I invite Greg Dorey to a barbecue in the garden? Would you allow me to fire up a barbecue? And
so it's good PR for me and the garden team, this question. So there is garden usage guidelines in the notice box outside the garden gates, which goes through kind of what people can and can't do in the garden. In terms of barbecues, people can gain permission from me or the gardens team. So if there was no other events going on and you were to have it in a responsible manner on the Broadwalk, you would be able to have a barbecue, but obviously not on the lawns, not near certain planting. But yeah, no, people do have barbecues in the garden, mainly up on the Broadwalk. Yeah, so that would be a nice evening for the two of you.
And I guess an extension to that, if I may, Sean, I mean, there may be some people watching who aren't, like myself, a resident, who maybe aren't even members of the inn. Just remind us, please, when is the garden, even now in these post-pandemic times, when is the garden open to the public each day of the week?
So we're open Monday to Friday from 12:30 till 3 p.m. But then we're also got a very active Instagram account. So if people are on Instagram, or even if they're not on Instagram, if they were to just Google Instagram Inner Temple Gardens, then you can see our posts and kind of what we're featuring, what we're up to on there. And then if they check our website or Instagram, then when we have open days, then they'll know about them as well.
And that open day, I think you mentioned it earlier about the Master's Garden being open, as well as Middle Temple and Inner Temple. Everything on schedule to run that again next year in 2020?
Yeah, definitely, hopefully. I mean, with touch wood, virtual garden events will not happen and people will just be in the garden enjoying it. We are hoping to open as part of Open House weekend this year, which
yes, indeed.
The church is opening as well and that is, I think, Sunday the 5th of September in the afternoon. So yeah, if people to watch, to keep an eye on the website and things. But yeah, it's Sunday the 5th of September, and then the church and the garden will open there.
That's fantastic. Sean, we have come to the conclusion of our time. Thank you so much. I feel as though we could chat for another hour about the garden matters, but I've certainly thoroughly enjoyed learning things that I didn't know. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. And yeah, it's nice that you enjoy the garden so much. So thank you.
You're very kind. Long may it continue. So, ladies and gentlemen, there we are. That was Master H meets Sean Harkin. The next Master H meets will be taking place in just 2 weeks' time, Monday the 24th of May, when Master H will be meeting Fern Schofield, a junior tenant at Falcon Chambers. And the topics that we will be covering, just to whet your appetite, will be Fern's knowledge of the law in relation to mobile telephone masts, of which she tells me she is an expert, as well as kite flying, wine, and disused London Underground stations. There'll obviously be a more serious element to it. We'll also be talking about pupillage and opportunities for members of the junior bar. This has been, as always, a Revels production for the Honourable Society of the Inner Temple. Executive producer Henrietta Amodio, produced by Kate Peters and Paul Clark. My name is Alastair Hodge, aka Master H, and this is me, Master H, saying good night. Good night.